I am pro-choice.
Let's see how the Forbes effect is helping Farage.
Look, I think all of these things, like assisted dying debate, which is going to come back again on June the 13th, I think issues around this, issues around abortion, I genuinely believe these are issues of personal conscience. I am pro-choice, but I think it's ludicrous, utterly ludicrous, that we can allow abortion up to 24 weeks, and yet if a child is born prematurely at 22 weeks, your local hospital will move heaven and earth and probably succeed in that child surviving and going on and living a normal life. So I believe there is an inconsistency in the law. I believe it's totally out of date, but I do believe, I wouldn't particularly want anyone around me to agree with that or disagree with that. I'd leave it up to them. I think our current situation on this is irrational.
That's interesting, isn't it? So at the heart of Nigel Farage's view, analysis of the abortion issue seems to be viability. The key moral factor, he believes, is viability. Could the unborn child, he or she, survive outside of the womb? If they could, or if they've got a chance of survival, then their life has worth. If they haven't got a chance of survival outside their womb, then their life doesn't have worth. In other words, it's okay to kill them through abortion. Now, I don't think there's any logic to this position at all. I think the idea that the unborn child is developing in the womb and one day they don't have any value, it's fine to dispose of them, and then a few days later it's decided that suddenly they do have value. So this is the same baby, so he or she, they're in the womb, developing slowly but surely towards full development, towards birth, and at one point they have no value, a week later their value is one human being. I just think this is entirely irrational. Another way of illustrating this is the point of viability depends on medical technology. So you can have the situation where, this is, I'm not saying it's a real situation, but it's a way of illustrating the point I'm making. So if you imagine that you've got an unborn child that's, say, 21 weeks gestation, and an abortion is about to be performed, but then in another hospital somewhere, someone makes a medical breakthrough that means that babies of this age, instead of having a 30% chance of survival, it goes up to a 55% chance of survival. So the people about to kill this baby in the abortion, are they supposed to go, oh, no, we can't do that after all. There's been a technological advance. So that's actually now more of a chance, more of a probability that this baby could survive. I mean, does that really make sense? Is that really a sensible way of judging the moral worth of the unborn child? I think absolutely not. I think, it doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, our position is very clear. Human life has value. That value is intrinsic, and the value of a human life is one human life, and that is an immense value. Every attempt to qualify that, to try to say, oh, well, it's a human life, but some are more valuable than the others, this one doesn't matter for this. I think all the reasons put forward on that basis basically don't work, and this is just yet another of them. Viability, it doesn't add up. So Farage's view here is extremely incomplete, but it's better than nothing, you could say. I mean, on his view, the time limit might be reduced by a couple of weeks. Okay, is that better than nothing? Well, it's better than nothing as long as people don't think, all right, we've solved that problem now. It all makes sense. What we're left with is a good and moral law with regard to abortion. The other thing Nigel Farage would need to think about, if he's saying viability is the key factor, is what about disabled babies? I mean, disabled babies can be killed right up to birth, and they would certainly be viable for the vast majority of that period. And so what's his take on that? So even from his own point of view, he needs to have a think about the issue of disabled babies. Now, I would imagine in Nigel Farage's thought world, this isn't something that occupies a great deal of his thinking time. It's not something he'll be challenged on, particularly as he goes round rounds of media interviews. So I would imagine he probably won't really be pressed to think this issue through. So if Nigel Farage had his way and the abortion time limit was changed to viability, that would change it from 24 weeks down to, say, 22 weeks. Okay, how many abortions would that prevent? Well under 1%, or actually well under 0.5% of abortions. So a really tiny, tiny number. Would that be better than nothing? It's better than nothing, but it's a fairly trivial proportion of the total of abortions taking place. Now, when I first heard Nigel Farage saying this, the thought crossed my mind, is this a sort of tactical stance? Because he thinks it will just help keep pro-life people on board a bit while still being basically pro-choice. But he has been consistent in this view over the years, so I'm willing to accept this is his genuine opinion. Now, I found his choice of language there, saying it was a ludicrous situation. I would tend to think, a ludicrous situation might be one where you have to fill in the same form 3 times. We're talking about unborn children being killed. Ludicrous, I'm not sure that's quite the right language. But Nigel Farage makes his overall view very, very clear. He says he's pro-choice. Translation is pro-abortion. And I think that is the fundamental thing. He'd maybe change the time limits to prevent a tiny, tiny fraction of abortions, but basically is pro-abortion. Now, it's fascinating that he says it's an issue of personal conscience. In other words, it's a matter of right and wrong, but he doesn't care what other people within Reform UK think. As far as I'm concerned, this makes no sense at all. Like I said, it's a matter of conscience. In other words, it's a matter of morality. It's a matter of what's right and what's wrong. Therefore, I don't care what party policy is. I don't care what other people think. In other words, this is a terrible thing. Viable babies are being killed. This is something that really shouldn't be happening, but I don't care. I don't care if other people agree. I don't care which way a vote's going to go. I don't care what our party policy is. I just think it's a really bizarre point of view. To my mind, if it's a matter of right and wrong, then this brings it's a weighty issue. This is an issue where you do care what other people think. You want to bring other people's views into line with what's right as well. Now, you may say, it's quite a trivial issue, but this is not a trivial issue. This is a hugely weighty moral issue. So to take the line of, this happens to be my view, but I don't care what anyone else thinks, that's just entirely nonsensical. To try and illustrate that point, let's say, imagine Nigel Farage was in a country where slavery was being practiced. And if Nigel Farage said, I think slavery is wrong, very wrong, but that's just me. You think what you like. This is an issue of conscience. Obviously, the party is neutral, because this is just a matter of what's right and wrong. So basically, think whatever you like. It doesn't matter. It's as though it's saying the important thing is people's freedom to have what they like going on in their own mind, not saving lives or stopping slavery. It's as though that's not so important. The important thing is people can just think what they like. That's a more important principle. Now, I said at the beginning, Nigel Farage is benefiting from the Forbes effect. Now, I'll explain to you what the Forbes effect is. The Forbes effect is named after Kate Forbes, and it's this. So Kate Forbes would say something based on her Christian faith. Like she said, for example, she would have voted against same-sex marriage. And that gets reported very widely in the mainstream media. Christian groups, campaigning groups, they run an article, big picture of Kate Forbes. Kate Forbes says she would have voted against same-sex marriage, and everyone knows about it. Everyone knows. But then if the next day Kate Forbes says something that's totally opposed to normal, traditional, orthodox Christian teaching, so she said, homosexual relationships, there's nothing wrong with those, she'll defend the right for women to have an abortion, says something like that, say completely the opposite of traditional Christian teaching, then who'll report that? Will the mainstream media report it? Well, no, because it's a non-story. That's like the headline would be, Kate Forbes thinks the same as everyone else. There's no story. Do the Christian groups report it? No. I guess because they think, I don't know, maybe they think Kate Forbes is a Christian, so you shouldn't criticise her. I don't know. So people just don't hear about it. So I often have the conversation with people. People say, Kate Forbes, she's very brave, isn't she? She speaks out, she doesn't back down, she just says what she thinks and takes the flak. And I'll say, well, she did on this issue, but she didn't on this issue and this issue. And the person normally goes, really? I didn't know that. Is that true? And that's because only one half of what she says gets reported. And Nigel Farage is now benefiting from exactly the same effect. So you get a media report. What's the story in the media? The story is that Nigel Farage has said that there should be some restrictions on abortion. Very, very slight, but the headline is Nigel Farage calls for restrictions on abortion. Similarly to Kate Forbes, the pro-life tiny little bit of his view is newsworthy. When he says he's pro-choice, and that's basically his fundamental position, well, that's not news. So that doesn't get reported, or that's down there in the small print. But then pro-life campaigning groups, what do? They will run news stories. Nigel Farage wants restrictions on abortion. So from their point of view, the good news story is presented, then the bad news, that is basically fundamentally, well, virtually completely pro-choice, that's down there in the small print. So I've already had people saying to me, oh, Nigel Farage is anti-abortion, did you know that? Reformer pro-life. Had you realised? Have you heard what he said the other day? And this is what it results in. People are being misled by totally one-sided reporting. So we're getting into a situation where a pro-abortion politician is being widely seen as pro-life, and part of the reason for that is because of the reporting by pro-life groups. Again, to try and illustrate the point here, if you think about, say, slavery, if Nigel Farage was in a country where there was slavery operating, and Nigel Farage called for all slaves to be granted freedom on their 90th birthday, then they're totally free. The headline would be, Nigel Farage calls for freedom for slaves. Front page of the abolitionist magazines, Nigel Farage calls for freedom. People will be hailing Nigel Farage, the abolitionists. Meanwhile, the real abolition movement, people will be thinking, well, what do we need them for? We've got Nigel Farage now. He's calling for freedom for the slaves. He's the one who's going to solve this problem. Really? I don't think so. Right, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.